All right, family, I'm back. Gonna get into a little bit more of this Jordan Maxwell, Secret Life of Symbols. All right, this is Incorporating America. Secret Life of Symbols with Jordan Maxwell, Incorporating America. Uh-oh. Hello. Hold tight, y'all. Dang, I forgot I had did the Bluetooth. Cause I don't be wanting it. I have several devices here, and I don't be wanting to connect the wrong way. Oh, did I turn it off? Oh, I ain't even got it on, y'all. Okay, y'all got the old looking girl. Y'all know how I do. Once I get on the ball, I get on the ball. Though.
Hello. Bluetooth.
I'm not perfect.
It was understood that we are now, after the war, many things, but united was not one of them. One half of the country was.
This is Secret Life of Symbols.
Today, we're going to talk about corporations. The United States of America no longer exists. And the reason why it doesn't exist, we are now a corporation. We're not a country. And the reason why is because many years ago, there was something happened here called the Civil War. And the Civil War, we're told, was one of the bloodiest wars humans have ever fought on the earth. It was a very bloody war. And so after it was over, it was understood that we are now, after the war, many things, but united was not one of them. One half of the country was killing the other half. And there's a lot of bad feelings among the Americans back and forth between North and South. Well, it was decided, all right, then let's do this. Let's have a United States corporation. We'll start a company. We'll call it the United States Corporation. It'll be a privately run municipal corporation. And we'll call it the United States Corporation. So therefore, everyone who is here will become an employee of the corporation. If you're working for this corporation, when you're on duty, you always usually have some sort of an identification tag showing that you're an employee of the company. As long as you are working and you're making money, then you are contributing to the company, the corporation. You're on the company time, so to speak. And so you are making money, and therefore you're paying out bills and paying out taxes and fines and fees and all of that. And so you are securing the corporation. They need the money. And so you're giving them the money. You're making the money and giving it to them. So you are a security. Water is the basis for our economics, period, on the earth. Because in the ancient world, going far back as the earliest times of the Roman Empire, the powers that be in the world then realized that they started to build their economic system in the Roman Empire based on the Phoenician Canaanite system of commerce in the Middle East, because they knew how to make money and they knew how to control money. So the ancient Romans understood and finally figured out that there should be two laws on the earth. The earth is two things. The earth is water and land. So there should be a law for the water and a law for the land. So today we even have terms that say, well, that's the law of the land. Why do you distinguish it law of the land? Because there's another law called the law of the sea, or the law of water. So the law of the land is the laws that govern the culture of people on a particular spot of land. And so when you go to another country, you should be aware that there's a law of the land, which means there's a custom. You have to get used to the way people live and the way they do things. There's another law that supersedes that law, which is far more important. It's called the law of the sea. And the law of the sea is the law of water. And the law of water is simply banking, banks. Banks are all over the world. All banks operate the same. They operate on water. And so the bottom line is that your commerce is based on water. All ships, airships, rocket ships, sailing ships, I don't care what it is. If it's a ship, it's always referred to as a female. It's always she. The captains of any ship will tell you, oh, she's a good ship and she's seaworthy, and oh, she's this and she's that. What do you mean she? The reason why captains call their ships she is because she delivers the product. And the product is usually based on water. And when her water breaks, there's a product. And the product was caused by the male manufacturing. So he has manufactured and she is in labor building the product. And so the product is based on water because when her water broke, the product comes out. If you're going to get married, you have to have a license, because getting married, according to our laws today under the corporation, if you are getting married, you are an employee whose first duty is to the corporation. And so therefore you need to work and pay your bills and pay your taxes and everything, because you're a security for the body social. The body social means the whole company. When you retire, which means you're going to bed, you're going to sleep, or you're going to quit, you're going to retire, you get Social Security. No, you are the security for the body social. And so they're going to give you a few dollars to live on, keep you alive, because if they don't, you're going to get all very upset. You don't have any money to live on, and you're going to cause more trouble. Give him something to live on and get him out of here, right? When a ship pulls into port, because I said all of our commerce is done by water, our biggest business is shipping, all over the world, shipping. When a ship pulls into harbor, it parks at its what we call its berth. It's a berth where they're berthing the ship, berth. And so any item that was on that ship represents money. Therefore, every time a television or a car or anything, whatever that item is that's being brought here from another country, it's coming in on a ship, and she is bringing in the product, right? She. When the ship parks, it's sitting in its berth, and therefore every single item coming off of that ship has to have its own certificate of manifest. Why? Because yesterday the ship wasn't here. But this morning you come to work and there's a ship here with $800 million worth of Toyotas. So it's manifested. So you have to have a manifest. And it's called a certificate of manifest, which goes with each one of those products. And on that manifest, it tells you, is it a 4-door? Is it 2-door? Does it have air conditioning? What nationality is it? How much does the baby weigh? What color eyes does he have? And does he have 5 fingers? And is he African or what? Does he have air conditioning? So you are simply a product, because you are a product that has to have its own certificate of birth. So therefore you have today something called a birth certificate. And it has to be signed by the dock, because that's where the ship is sitting, at the dock. And if you happen by chance to have one of the cars or one of the TVs drop off in the ocean, that's okay. There are insurances that cover that, but you have to have a death certificate. Why? Because you're not just going to lose a car and the bank is not going to make money on that. You lost a car? Yeah, well, you better go find it. And if you can't find it, then you need to go through the regulations. and sign a death certificate. And that's why, as I said, that's why you have to have a license, because this is a corporation. And used to, when we were a republic, you could wear a gun anytime you wanted, and you could go into town and go in the bar, and if you have a falling out with a guy in the bar, you can either settle it like gentlemen, or you can go out the street and duel. And one of you is not going home tonight, see? Why? Because it was a free country, and individuals, men and women and children, when this country was founded, was said to be, and it was understood that you are a sovereign in this country. That's why you could wear a gun anytime you wanted. Cowboys wear guns, and then people even in the eastern states will wear guns. Why? Because you are a sovereign under international law. Anyone born in the United States of America was a sovereign, which means you're a king or a queen. And so the man was king of his realm, king of his home. And women were the queens. A king and a queen have the privilege of declaring war on any time they please, on anyone they please. That's one of the nice things about being a king. You don't need to ask anybody permission. You want to go out and pick a fight? Well, you better have a gun with you. It doesn't mean you're going to win. It doesn't mean you're smart for doing that. It just means you're armed, and you're going to face another guy, and he's armed. So you better figure out if you can do this or not, right? Now we understand that your body is like 78% water. When you come out of your mother, her water broke. So therefore, everything we do in commerce is based on water. And that being the case, is based on shipping. The idea is don't rock the boat when you're at work. Don't rock the boat. We run a tight ship here. We don't want to rock the boat. And so are you with us, mate? Yeah, come aboard on the citizenship. And so now you got the dealership and sportsmanship and citizenship and all the different kind of words that end in ship. Why do you have banks? Where do you find banks? Banks are on both sides of a river. They're called river banks. What does a river bank do? It directs the flow of the currency. Money runs through your hands like water. No, money is water. That's when you put it into a bank, it's called currency, because it's a current. It's an ebb and flow. Comes in and goes out. It comes in and goes out. It's a flow of money. And then money is water. Money is a cash flow, a liquid asset. There's a reason why everything works the way it does. In a corporation, let's say you work for General Electric or a Ford Motor Company. General Electric cannot make law like stamped in stone. Whatever General Electric does, they don't have the power to create law. But they do have the power as a corporation to make their policy. And so they will tell you, look, it's just our policy. There's no damn law. There's no law that says it. But our policy is for you to show up at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's just our policy. And our policy says that you take off at 11:30 for lunch and you go home at 4 o'clock. That's just our policy. It's not written in stone in God's law. It's just our policy. So today, you ask any politician, what kind of law do we have in this country today? And they would tell you it's called public policy. It's a policy. It's not law. Who came up with that policy? Well, we have policy makers. Oh, really? Policy makers? Oh, okay. Yeah, they're lawmakers. They're the lawmakers. They make the policy. They don't make law. They make a policy. And it's just our policy that you do this and you do that. You go 65 on the highway and you do this, you park there, and these are all just our policy. And the police will see to it you abide by it. So that's where the police come in. Because back in the John Wayne days and the cowboy and Indians, there was no police. Why? Because you have a constitution. You're a free man and can do whatever you please to do. But you take care of yourself. There's no government checks. There's no government anything. If you just take care of yourself, and if you want to buy a gun, buy 10 of them. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. You're free as an American. But today, you're no longer an American. You are a U.S. citizen. U.S. is a privately owned company, a corporation. It's called a municipal corporation. It's a company. Well, according to corporate law, you have to have, this is in all corporate law, you've got to have a president of the corporation. That's just corporate law. You've got to have a vice president of the corporation, and you got to have a secretary treasurer, because those three guys are the main ones that handle the money. And since we are giving you permission, I'm giving you permission because I'm playing the part of God. I am the corporation, 1870. But if I'm going to give you the privilege, and you can be a corporation too, but I gave you permission. So I want 20% off the top. You understand? It's just business. When we're talking about the Federal Reserve, first thing you need to understand is, where is the Federal Reserve's corporate headquarters? Because it's going to tell you something when you find out. Corporate headquarters for the Internal Revenue and the Federal Reserve is in Puerto Rico, not the United States corporation. And why is it in Puerto Rico? Because Puerto Rico was picked a long time ago, over 1,000 years ago. It was picked by the pirates of the Caribbean. That's why today Puerto Rico houses the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue. It's because the Federal Reserve is today the pirates of the Caribbean. When you begin to see that this is the whole setup in the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue, it's just piracy. It's just the pirates of the Caribbean, and that's where they started. So what was the symbol for the pirates of the Caribbean? Well, their flag was a black flag with a skull and crossbones. And it was referred to as the Jolly Roger. Well, today, the skull and crossbones are a very important symbol used in World Freemasonry. It's used on toxic and poisonous medicines and things. Skull and crossbones basically meant death. Well, that's what piracy in the Caribbean was like. It was a very dangerous and deadly game where they were stealing on the high seas. And so when you're stealing something on the high seas, then you have to deal with an admiral, which gives us our word Admiralty Law. Admiralty Law is the law of the high seas. England, in order to travel the world and do what they did to build their great empire, were great seafaring peoples. Their navies were next to none. And so this is where the idea that even in England today, they have such a thing as an admiralty. And so it gives birth to an admiralty law, which means it's giving birth to a law based on water. Why? Because England was the masters of the seas after the Spanish. And so today, it's just interesting that the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue are corporate headquarters in the Caribbean. As it still is today, ships will carry their own flag so that anyone else on the sea will see that ship with that flag and understand who owns it and who's controlling that ship. Well, they developed an idea a long time ago among the pirates to fool their victims, and they would put up a flag of a country that was friendly with, I guess, the other ships coming, and so the other ships would not think anything about it until they got close enough to attack them. Then they would send up their Jolly Roger flag, the flag that represents the pirates. Then the people on the other ship know they're so close now. They thought it was a friendly ship. Now they find out it's a pirate ship. And so that's where we get the concept today of a false flag. And my goodness, there are false flags everywhere in the world that we live today. So many people think that if you trust some country or trust somebody to do something for you, and he's a friend, and then one day you find out they're not your friend. They've never been your friend. Then we see the idea of a false flag. They were putting up the false colors. And we even say that kind of thing today, that Well, I didn't, I was with so and so last night. He showed his true colors.
Yep, false.
True colors? What do you mean? A false flag? Yeah, because he's
The
always
mask
been
came
nice.
off.
He's always been courteous, and last night he was horrible. So now he's showing his true colors. That tells me he's been putting up a false flag all this time. Now we know who he really is or how he really thinks. I would say, first of all, it's not federal and it's not a reserve because it isn't, there has no reserve. They just print money. And they don't really print money. They print what they call a Federal Reserve note. And it says on the Federal Reserve note, it says this note is legal tender for privates, public and private. And then it used to also say that you could take this to the bank and turn it in for real money. That's what it said on the bills. 50 to 100 years ago, it was say on the bill, you can take this to the bank and turn it in for real money. So right off the bat, they tell you this is not money. It represents money, but it's not money. And so you don't have to go around with gold coins buying everything. Just take the dollar bills that represents the gold coin. But the problem is the government and the founding of this country, the Constitution doesn't say that it's all right to have paper that represents money. No, money is gold and silver, period. End of the day, that's it. It's either silver or gold or it's not money. And so if you're going to print paper, and incidentally, in California, the 1848 California Constitution, there's two of them, 1848, and I think the other was 1869. But the 1848 original Constitution of California expressly says no banking can be done within the state of California. California will not allow any banks to exist in the state of California, period. You can have private corporations who will deal within themselves, but no bank can operate within the state of California. Then later on, they had a civil war, and after the Civil War, well, things changed a little bit. So now you can have a bank in California. So many of our wars are actually economic. The Federal Reserve, I think it was established back in 1913. The way it was established was that the bankers in America, who were not actually American, they were living in America, but they were actually British-backed bankers, J.P. Morgan, bankers like that, who actually came from Europe and from England, they got together and they decided to put together a trick and to see if it would work. And so they got together on a private island off of the coast of Georgia. And I'm not an authority on this, but it's well known that these men met on this island called Jekyll Island.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Why would it be called Jekyll, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Is because these bankers were not interested in protecting America. They were interested in.
Wow, this is where I live. Brunswick, St. Simon's, Jekyll Island, the Golden Isles. Ain't that a bitch?
Buying off everything in America for their British masters. And so they came up with an idea that we will produce paper money, which represents money. And if we can get that across through the Congress and the Senate agrees to that, then we will also add a little something we forgot to tell you. It is called fractional banking. Fractional banking means every dollar we publish that we give to you, that dollar can make us, you can multiply it by 10, by 9 or 10. So when somebody puts $1 into the bank for on deposit, the bank can then say that deposit was $10. Well, if you put in 100, the bank can say on their records that you put 1,000 in. But if you put $1 million in, the bank now says that you put $10 million in. And that's how America has become so powerful around the world. Because no matter how much money no matter how many Federal Reserve notes we have, there may be millions in the bank, but you can multiply it by 10. And so therefore, oh my goodness, then you can multiply that later by 10. And now you've got a country that has a massive amount of money. If you put, say, $10 in the bank is allowed to loan out to other people 100. Because they can multiply anything that comes into their bank, they can multiply it by 10. It's called fractional banking. It's pretty well known that there is an organization in the world today called the Round Table Group. And their idea of this round table group is a round table of the big bankers, the big shots that run the British Empire. And they come together and they sit at a round table. So why they are required to sit at a round table? Because the idea is not one of them is the boss of bosses. It's a group, and they're all equal around the table, but they're all bankers, and they're all working for the same cause. And so ultimately, people don't realize that all around the world, especially in America, you're buying things and purchasing things. And so in 1902, these bankers, these London bankers, they met in 1902, and the idea was that they were going to slowly but surely infiltrate into the United States' business and ultimately get the United States of America into debt, and so that they will ultimately be able to own the United States of America for England. We have documented evidence that the Federal Reserve is a part of that plan to actually take over America and do it in such a way as to get America involved in business
systematically.
So that eventually the British banking cartels around the world will ultimately own the corporation called United States. And so that's what happened today. We are now under the authority of the British government.
Oh, you made it, huh,
Under the system of the Federal Reserve, we've had, it was supposed to be, what we were told is that the Federal Reserve was being put together to protect the fluctuation in business. Sometimes we make money, sometimes we're broke, but to make sure that we always have a nice, even flow of money, we need someone to control that. And so once they bought into that idea and accepted the Federal Reserve, now you've had 2 world wars, and God knows how many wars are going on each day that the Federal Reserve is financing the militaries around the world. And the more you finance the militaries, the bigger the wars get. Now they're all over the world. And so we see that as any normal big fight, any prize fight, you're going to have a fight promoter. And this person is the fight promoter is going to put up the money for the fight and finance the event and pay all the bills for everybody. But he's the fight promoter. Why? He's spending millions of dollars. But he is spending millions because he's going to make multiple millions on the fight. So we have today the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue and this secret government that's operating out of London. And ultimately, they are the fight promoters. They're causing the wars all around the world. And United States citizens and people are getting involved, in these wars, never realizing these wars are being financed to have a fight, period. They're called fight promoters. I'm Jordan Maxwell, and thank you for watching.
This is Secret Life of Symbols.
First of all, what we're talking about when I say the dawn of a new day, it's a catchphrase that means something to powerful people in the world that we're not supposed to know anything about. Like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. But if you were in the big club, you would already know what that catchphrase, dawn of a new day, really means. So in order to explain this the best way I can, we need to go back to the California legislature back in 1953.
I already streamed this
It's
one.
called the 11th Report.
This is Secret Life of Symbols.
This dollar bill has value because it is based on your physical body. Your flesh and blood body backs up the authority of this money. If you're an American, this money is backed up by your body. Now let me show you how. When you look at the front of the dollar bill, you will see on each side are serial numbers for this particular dollar bill, are serial numbers. If you look on the back of your Social Security card, you will see the numbers on the bottom. The numbers on the bottom, usually in red, represent your blood on the New York Stock Exchange. It represents your physical body. That's why the numbers are in red, representing your blood. Now, when you take the numbers on the Social Security card and put it next to the serial numbers on the dollar bill, you will see it's the same sequence of numbers and letters. And so what it's actually telling you is that there's like whatever the amount is, 24 million or 4 million or $6 million, whatever it is your body is worth on the New York Stock Exchange.
That's right.
There's that much money out there all over the world in fives and tens and hundreds with your Social Security number on it. So these numbers line up.
This is true. I think I mentioned this before a while back. That I actually went. It was a site. It's a government site. I think it is the IRS or the Department of Treasury or something like that. It's been a while since I did it, but just like Jordan said, you punch in that red number on the back of your Social Security card, and it'll tell you exactly how much money you worth. Because I did it.
Exactly correct. The same way. The numbers can be in blue, black, or red. And so this is why we, years ago, we used to say the government is just going to beat you black and blue. Because black and blue are colors that are used in banking. You have to sign with a blue or black pen. Or you can sign with a red pen, which represents your blood. Your physical body is really very important to the corporation called the United States Corporation. That, again, is why they want you to wear your seat belt and have insurance. And in case something does happen to you, you need to have insurance. Why? Because the government doesn't want to pay for you to be in a hospital. They want you out making money for them. They don't have to put the money in to protect you in a hospital. Go get your own insurance. Let them pay for it. The real powers behind banking today in America is insurance companies. Insurance companies are the most powerful hand behind the world of money because it has something to do with the 14th Amendment and how we were changed over from sovereignty, man, woman, and child, into a U.S. citizen. During the 1870s, when the corporation was being born in the minds of the politicians here, when they realized the United States of America was no longer a viable entity because we are a lot of things, but united isn't one of them. So we're no longer a United States, but we're a corporation. And so therefore your body now becomes a security for that corporation and needs money. It's a big corporation and needs money coming in. So that's why they want you to stay safe and drive safe so that you can make money. They don't want to put money out on you. They need you to go out and make money for themselves. This changeover from being sovereign man, woman, and child sovereigns, which means you are your own law. But when we change over from the United States of America into a corporation in 1870, and we became known to the world as the United States Corporation, not the United States of America. From 1870 to the First World War and then the Second World War, the United States Corporation went broke, financing all these escapades around the world with wars and revolutions and paying other countries to be our friends and all that. So the corporation called United States went broke. So they had to go back to the old days, go back to the British banking cartels who could print money out of nothing and had the ability to finance anything they wanted to do. And so the corporation had to borrow money from the British bankers to keep this corporation going because the corporation's broke. And you don't want to go broke when you got millions of people who want to eat tonight and the company, the United States, no longer is operable because it's broke. So the United States went to the European banking system and asked for loans to give us some money, loan us some money so we can keep our corporation going. Well, the bankers there said, well, why would we do that? You are already broke. So why would we turn around and give you money when we know you're broke? So how are you going to pay us back if we did give you the money? And so the British bankers and the international bankers in Europe came up with a brilliant idea. We'll loan you the money on whatever it is you need. We'll give you a blank check and you can do whatever you want with it and we'll loan you the money. But what we want is we want your citizens as collateral. And so the idea was we'll give you lots of money, but we want your daughter, okay? We want your son. We want your wife. And so today we are collateral for the money that was borrowed to keep the corporation going back in the 1870s to the First World War. And so today we still talk about how we have a national debt. We have to pay off this national debt. No one's ever asked the question, who are we paying off? Who are we in debt to? My God, I thought we were the most powerful country in the world, and we're the envy of the whole world, and yet we have a national debt. And so the politicians tell, no, what it is that we owe ourselves. You know, we do a lot for you, and so we spend a lot of money on you, building your bridges and all that kind of stuff we do. And so we just want to keep it in the house. So you need to pay us, your government. Yeah, but it's not your government. It represents the bankers of Europe and England. And there is a debt, and you will pay it because the British bankers loaned us a lot of money to build our railroads and our airports and our highways and all kinds of things that we've been building America. And it's very impressive. Yeah, but you don't have any money. You went broke during the First World War. And so that's why we today are a collateral for the debt. We do have a national debt. And ultimately, at the bottom line is the Vatican. The Vatican is the ultimate bottom line on all of this dark dealings behind the scenes with bankers in Europe, wars and violence. The whole banking establishment is based on the Vatican canon law. It's a very big story about the history of the world. That the 33rd president of the United States was Harry Truman. And Truman made an interesting statement. Somebody asked him, is there anything going on in history that we haven't been told? And he said, the only thing that's hidden in history are the facts of life that you don't know. How this country really was founded, and where the money really came from, and who you really are. That you don't know, well, that's the real hidden history of this country. All of this stuff that you think you understand, nobody really understands how this system works. It's based on your blood, it's based on your body, it's based on putting your children up as collateral for later bills. It's a remarkable story, and it brings into play the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Federal Reserve, international wars. Like used to many years ago, they used to say, war is good business. You should invest your son. It's just a business. Today, we even have people called fight promoters. They put up the money and they organize the fight and they pick out who's going to fight who and they pay both sides. And the whole thing is a show. This is why during wartime, you'll hear the generals talking about the wars in the Pacific theater or the wars in the Atlantic theater. A theater is a, is a word used in relation to a show. And that's why, because it is a show. And then you get into the esoteric symbols. On the dollar bill side with the pyramid has 13 layers. There are 13 layers in the pyramid. There are 72 stones in the pyramid. The pyramid has an all-seeing eye that's not touching the pyramid. Above it, it has the letters in Latin says Annuit Coeptus. Basically, Annuit Coeptus simply means our enterprise or our project now is a success. What project? What is it that's a project that's now a success? On the bottom, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum. Novus is a novice, meaning new. Ordo as order, and seclorum as secular, which means of the world. It's secular. It's a secular project, and it seems to be working. So our project is now a success. What? The new order of the world. When you hear people talk about the New World Order, it's on the American dollar bill, New World Order. And it's based on what? It's based on the ancient Egyptian concepts of government, finance, law, and the way the ancient Egyptians understood the world at large. That's why you have a pyramid. Now, interesting, the word pyramid comes from, it's actually two words. A lot of people don't know this. Pyramid is two words put together, pyra and mid. Pyra is fire, like pyromaniac. Pyrotex is fire. And mid simply means middle. So you put the two together, it becomes pyramid, or the fire in the middle. This is why today, when you go into public buildings like restaurants and hotels, you will see the restrooms for male and female, right? And on the male restrooms, all over in the public, will always be a pyramid. It's always a triangle or a pyramid on a male restroom. Women's is always a circle on the women's. Why? Because the pyramid is fire in the middle. And so the idea was that the fire of sex is in the middle of the human body. And so the women are also involved with this. They're called the circle of life. They keep the circle of life going. Without the women, there's no children. You'll see around the pyramid, you will see a circle, and that symbolizes the sun. And that symbolizing the sun has to do with Stonehenge. Stonehenge seems to be connected to the Great Pyramid of Egypt because they've used the same identical measuring inside Stonehenge as they used in the pyramid. The connection between Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Egypt, not all the pyramids, only that one pyramid called the Great Pyramid. That's not the big one in the middle. That's the one just before it, is actually called the Great Pyramid. And that Great Pyramid uses what is called the pyramid inch. It has to do with what the Egyptians called the sacred cubit, but that's another story. But the pyramid inch is used in the pyramid and in Stonehenge. This eye in the pyramid is representing the Egyptian sun god. The eagle, of course, represents the sun, and of course, on one side, we see that there's 32 feathers in one wing of the eagle and 33 on the other wing. 32 and 33 are Masonic numbers, the 32nd degree and then the 33rd degree. And of course, when you're going into court, they're going to give you the 3rd degree. And so showing that the courts are all Masonic construction to start with. So if you're not a Mason, you need to stay out of court. You better find out what you're doing when you go into court, because they're going to give you the 3rd degree. You will see 13 stars above the eagle's head, but the 13 stars are in the configuration of what we call the Star of David. It's actually a 6-pointed star, which is a hexagram. We call it the Star of David, but that is not correct. Actually, in point of fact, it's called the Star of Saturn. And look it up in the encyclopedias, and you will see a 6-pointed star has always been referred to as the Star of Saturn. But Saturn plays a very big part today in the world religions. The 13 stars, there are 13 arrows, there are 13 berries and leaves, there are 13 strips on the eagle's chest for the original American flag. The tail of the eagle has 9 feathers. There's a reason why. 9 is very important to the secret societies of Freemasonry coming out of the Vatican. The Vatican Freemasonry, York and Scottish Rite Freemasonry, they all realize that there's something very important about the 9 feathers, because the tail feathers of a bird help it direct its flight. It can decide where it wants to go according to the tail feathers. The reason why this is important, because if you look up the history of the Knights Templar, they were referred to as the Knights of the Temple of Solomon. Today it's in the Wailing Wall, is the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, is at the Wailing Wall. But if you look up in the dictionaries or encyclopedias the history of the Knights Templars, today what is called Knights Templars, we in America today call them the international bankers. The banking elite, like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and all of these international elites, all are referred to in law as Knights Templars. But the bottom line on this is that if you look up the history of the Knights Templars in encyclopedias, it will tell you that this Knights Templars were founded by 9 men. 9 men founded the Knights Templars. And then they will give you some story about how these 9 men got together after the Crusades, once the Holy Land was protected under the Pope's dominion, and that there were so many people wanted to go to the Holy Land. It was very dangerous traveling in those days in the deserts to go to see the Holy Land. Those 9 men got together, the reference works say, and they formed a protection for the pilgrims going from Rome and from Europe over to the Middle East. Well, logic alone would tell you 9 men are not going to protect anybody. They're not going to go and protect all the millions of pilgrims going to the Middle East with 9 men. That was a cover story. But the actual story was that the Knights Templars were 9 Catholic Masonic Order Freemasons who were putting together for the Vatican a whole new superstructure of money and banking and government, and the entire operation was under the Vatican control, and there were 9 men who were in charge of that project of rebuilding a new order in Europe. And so that's why the eagle has the 9 tail feathers. And most of the members of secret societies know that. If you bring this up, they'll tell you, yeah, well, there was no 9 men who protected the pilgrims. No 9 men could do that. The eagle has always been the symbol for the sun. Why? Because it has an eagle eye. It can see everything. It's high up. The ancient peoples they saw their eyes were perfectly round, and then they look at the sky and see the sun is perfectly round. And then in their mind, the sun represented light, which light means intellectual, spiritual intelligence. You're enlightened instead of being ignorant and ill-informed and in the dark. And so they figured that God must be very bright. He's very brilliant. And so if you follow God, the sun, you're his pupil. And so that's why today we have a pupil in the eye, because the sun is round and we are his pupil. We're following him. I remember reading back in the 60s that the dimensions of the dollar bill were based on the old Arabic dimensions of a magic carpet. They said that this was like a magic carpet. Yeah, it is. You got enough of them, you can go anywhere. Lots of interesting things about the American dollar bill and our actual real history of where we've come from. I'm Jordan Maxwell, and thank you for watching.
This is Secret Life of Symbols.
Moses is one of the most interesting characters in the Bible. I hope to show you why. So we all know that Moses was the prophet that brought down the law to the Jewish people, and he has become the symbol for law pretty much around the world. So in talking about Moses, you think about law, but there's a lot more to Moses that you need to know about. Moses was a prophet in the Jewish system of things. He was one of the oldest names in the Bible, one of the most revered figures in the Bible, because he was supposedly so close to God. And he has given to the world the 10 Commandments. The history of Moses takes us back to ancient Egypt and to the Israelites back in the time of Egypt and ancient Egypt. He was a very fierce man for the truth and for leading the people, and supposedly the Jewish people, the Hebrew people. He was a major leader at the time when they were in Egypt. And he became, because he went up into the mountain and got the 10 Commandments from God, he became known as the lawgiver. The point we need to remember is that Moses was a very important man to the Hebrew people and into the history of the Jewish people in Egypt. He was supposedly born in Egypt and was bred in the house of the princess, and he was around royalty continually, and yet he had a love for the Jewish God, and so he protected the Jewish people, and he became so important to the history of the Hebrew people at the time of Egypt that today he even is recognized as a very important person to remember in history about law. He was the one who led them out of Egypt, according to the story that Egyptian life had become so difficult for the Jewish people, and they wanted out of Egypt. And so Moses was the one who had the strength to stand up before Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go, and we will leave out of Egypt." And so this is even today still remembered, a very heroic deed for Moses to step up and take the leadership of the Hebrew people and walk out of Egypt and leave Egypt. He took them up into the north, where we today refer to it as Lebanon and Israel, etc. The most important point I wish to make is the fact that there is so much more to this ancient prophet, leader of the Hebrew people, than has been discussed publicly. And I want to talk about some of those things. Moses was called by God to come up into the mountain of Mount Sinai. And God was going to give Moses what we now refer to as the Ten Commandments, which is actually a new dispensation for Jewish law, a brand new way to understand the Jewish understanding of God. And so he goes up into the mountain and he encounters the presence of God, and God gives him 10 commandments to bring back to the people to begin a new dispensation, a new understanding of God. And so when Moses comes down from the mountain, he sees the Jewish people still worshiping God the old way. They were worshiping a golden calf because it had to do with the particular astrological times in which they were living. And the times in which they were living then, at the time of the Ten Commandments, was Taurus the bull. And so they were worshiping the golden calf in relation to Taurus the bull. Well, Moses comes down and sees the Jewish people still worshiping in the old way and becomes very frustrated. Before he even talks to them, becomes very frustrated and then throws the law. It was referred to as the law. And so Moses throws down the law and breaks the law. So Moses was the first lawbreaker. He was carrying 2 stones on which the laws, the 10 commandments, were written. And so he carries these down, and then when he sees the Jewish people still worshiping the old way, he throws those down in frustration. And so that's where we get the term today, breaking the law. The Jews were worshiping the calf because they realized that they were worshiping the sun in the astrological age of Taurus the bull. The next astrological age of which Moses was going to lead his people into the next age was going to be Aries the ram. And he was teaching them that there was a new way they were going to worship God. And this time they would blow the ram's horn to signify the age of the ram, the shofar. Here we have pictures showing that God is handing Moses the 10 commandments on these tablets. The tablets themselves are very interesting, the design and what they were all about. We find that there's a very interesting connection between the 10 commandments of the Hebrews and the 12 negative confessions of the Egyptians. The Egyptians already had 12 laws, so to speak, and they were called the 12 negative confessions. And so when you read the negative confessions and then the 10 commandments, they're exactly the same. The only difference is one is in Egypt, they said, here are the things we will not do. There's a negative confession. Here are the things we will not do. We will not lie. We will not steal. We will not do this or that. Well, the 10 commandments says, the Lord says, you should not do this. You should not do that. But it's very similar. So we know basically where the 10 commandments came from the 12 negative confessions of Egypt. Well, if you remember that religion itself is a development of human creativity, and there are so many stories in different religious books around the world, so many wonderful stories and theological ideas and concepts, which obviously were just made up by men to promote their particular religious belief. But back to the Moses giving of the law, that particular scene of Moses with the 10 commandments, the very stalls and the very stones themselves is very important. Moses is always the lawgiver, and the Jews today still respect Moses as probably one of the most important people in their history besides Abraham. You will see Moses in pictures and paintings and sculptures. Moses has horns. And it's been all around the world. People have wondered, why is it Moses? He has horns. And it's interesting to understand what the horns represent on Moses. The horns of Moses, and you will see that there was in the ancient world, at Moses' time, in that ancient time, there was a moon god, and the moon god's name was Sin, and he was always represented by the lower quarter of the moon. And so the lower quarter of the moon was used as a symbol for moon worship. And they have goddesses of moon worship, which you have. Also, in Rome, you have moon gods. The Native Americans also have horns because they counted their days by many moons. Their days were like the Hebrews today. After 6 o'clock began a new day. Well, the same thing with the Native Americans. So all of these people from the ancient Hebrews to the Native Americans were using a lunar calendar. Lunar simply meaning the moon, and so the symbol for the lunar was the horns of the bull, or the horns that which the Vikings used. This is a symbol for the lunar symbol, which you'll find everywhere in different religions. These are the horns that Moses wore. Here in Israel, you'll see carvings of the arms raised and to praise the moon. And the Egyptian paintings show the moon. The Blessed Mother in Christianity stands on the moon. You'll see the moon everywhere in the ancient world of religion, which was showing us that the moon was very important, even at the time of Moses in Egypt. Moon worship was very prominent. And of course, today, the Islamic world still uses the moon also. And in the Western world, the moon is still used as a symbol. We're talking about a moon cult many thousands of years ago in Egypt, of which Moses was the leader of the Hebrew people, which were worshipers of the moon at that time. If you go on the web and just type in moon god Sin, it will have all kinds of information showing you about how the moon was a very important part of worship in the ancient world. And they will also tell you that Moses was a leader of a lunar cult. There's a lot of information about the moon cult and the moon god, Yahweh or Allah. Here is a classic example in the ancient world of the moon god Sin. The god himself his name was called Sin. And in the ancient world, Ai was a mountain in the times of ancient Egypt. Ai was a mountain, and so we have this moon god Sin on it, and in the mountain, Ai, and put it together and becomes Sinai. So Mount Sinai is actually the moon god Sin in the mountain of Sinai. Well, Mount Sinai today is felt to be the center for and the really foundation for the Jewish religion as it began to spread throughout the Middle East. Mount Sinai was where God met with Moses. God met with his people at Mount Sinai. But Mount Sinai is actually Sin Ai. And now it's interesting that today in most of the Western world, the word synagogue is spelled S-Y-N-A. But in Israel, it's S-I-N-A. Because Israel realizes that the original word was S-I-N, not S-Y-N, and because of the moon god Sin. Synagogue basically means temple of the moon, because Sin was the moon god. I think it's important to realize that there's a difference in the way it's spelled, one way in Israel and a different way in the rest of the world. Here is just one of many reference works. This is by an Andrew K. from the Southern Methodist University. His article is Traces of the Worship of the Moon God Sin Among the Early Israelites. The Jewish tradition talks about the combination of the heavenly moon as a part of the most important part of the Jewish worship at that time. There are many symbols and emblems and paintings showing Moses in relation to the moon. And so here is pictures of a priest lighting a fire to signal a new moon. Here you will see an illustration of the Israelites and their worship of the moon, the prayer to the new moon. And below you will see sanctification of the new moon. This is from Amsterdam as far back as 1723, showing the importance still in the worship of Israel for the new moon, for the moon. Above you will see the new moon etching from a book back in 1748, showing the Jews celebrating the new moon. Today, the new moon is still very important around the world to many cultures. And here we have a picture of Egypt and the Sinai. And down toward the bottom of the Sinai, there was a huge mountain range. And so here we see a better picture where Mount Sinai is referred to in the area of the wilderness of Sin. And Sin, of course, is the moon god. Sin is originally the moon god of the Arabic world. Allah and Sin and Moses with Yahweh, it all had to do with the worship of the moon god Sin. And for some reason, the ancient Arabic world placed a very high respect on the moon. It's probably based on some phenomena that the new moon caused, because the Arabic world and the ancient world in general realized that the moon has a huge effect on our bodies. It has an effect on our food supply, and it pulls the oceans of the world. And so the moon was very important to the ancient world. I mean, that is a whole study in itself, why the ancient Arabic world had such a reverence for the moon. They always used the moon to keep the track of days, because their days started at sundown at 6 o'clock. Because why? Because that's when the moon comes out. While the Christians were worshiping and having their holidays and important times in their religion, on Sunday they were worshiping worshiping the Son of God. The ancient Arabic world and the ancient Hebrews were under the influence of the moon god. The Christians, as you know, have a sun calendar, and their days start from sun to sun, while the Hebrews and the ancient Arabic world had a lunar calendar, which counts their days from sundown to sundown. The moon, as it comes up, and it was referred to as the lunar god who lived in the mountain, and the real Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai itself was understood to be a volcano. And this is why when Moses goes up into the Mount Sinai to get the new 10 Commandments from God, he is confronted by the mountain is on fire. And so anytime you have a mountain on fire, that happens if you have a volcano. And so Mount Sinai was known, and is even today recognized as being probably connected to volcano worship also. And so this is why Moses goes up and he sees the mountain on fire and he talks to God. And the scriptures, even in the Old Testament, the Bible says that the ancient Hebrews were frightened when they would hear the thunder in the mountain, because they said thunder was a word we call thunder, but the ancient Hebrews said it was the voice of God. He's talking to them. And he had lightning, and that was trying to get their attention. So God was very angry and very upset with the Jewish people, because it was like a mountain on fire. Well, of course, we're talking about a volcano. So Moses becomes important in volcano worship also. Here you will see Moses pictures. These are all pictures from Christian and Jewish publications showing Moses going up into the mountain, and it appears to be a volcano. Well, that's because it was a volcano. Here we have a Jewish publication showing the children of Israel running away when they hear God thundering in the mountain. It looks like a volcano. All of the pictures of Moses going up into the mountain to get the 10 Commandments always shows the mountain on fire. All right, so here we have Moses preparing to go up to the mountain to get the new 10 Commandments from God, and that appears to be a volcano. Here is a particular religious celebration. It's called the Feast of the Giving of the Law. And in the Hebrew reference works, You look up the celebration of the feast of the giving of the law, and what do you see but a volcano? So the word volcano comes from a Latin volcano god called Vulcan, or Volcanus. It's derived from an old Cretan deity, Volcanus. Here is the old volcano god Vulcan. And it was always because the people were frightened to death at the thunder and the lightning that was caused by the volcano. And they thought it was God talking to them. And so then we talk about Prometheus, was another ancient god about the time, was also a volcano god who was worshipped and took him to Greece, while Yahweh was a volcano god who the worshippers took him back to Judah. And this is again why Moses encountered God and the burning bush. And it seems as not only the burning bush, the whole mountain was on fire. Yahweh was worshipped by the Jews as a volcano god and a lunar deity. And there's a lot of interesting connections with the ancient world religions that it's not that easy to explain how all of these pieces came together to form a particular religion. It says in one of the reference books, it says, yet the original Yahweh seems to have begun as a volcano god also. Mount Sinai, where Moses encountered him, was the seat of a Midianite god who had formerly dwelt in a volcano. Here we have Moses getting the law from God, and you'll see the lightning and the fire and the thunder and the lightning all around him. We go back to the book of Exodus where we read, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud. Now this is talking about the time when the Jews were leaving out of Egypt, and God was going to be with them as they went on their journey. And so it said that God went before the people by day in a pillar of cloud. He showed that he was with them by having a cloud follow them everywhere they went to lead the way out. And by night, he would have a pillar of fire to give them the indication that he was with them at night. They could see the fire. So they knew God was with them. In the daytime, it would be a pillar of cloud, and at night, it would be a pillar of fire. It goes on to say in 22, it says, and he took not away the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night from before the people, to let them know he was with them. Well, that's what you get in a volcano, is a pillar of cloud by day. Right? A pillar of cloud by day does not necessarily mean God is there. It means it's a volcano. And then you have a pillar of fire by night, of course, a volcano. So we go on to read in different parts of the Old Testament Bible about Yahweh being a God of the fire and the pillar of fire, etc. Now, here in Job 38 in the Old Testament, we read that in the footnotes, the storm, the clouds, God's tent. And so the ancients believed the clouds were a tent in which God lived when he was following them. So the clouds, God's tent, gathered as the thunder, the voice of Yahweh roared. They descended, and God shoots the arrows of his lightning down. In 37, it says his thunderbolts. God thunders wonderfully with his voice, showing that Yahweh in the Old Testament was just another volcano god who thunders with his voice. And of course, Zeus was also connected to the worship of Yahweh because he was also a god of lightning and thunder, the same as Yahweh. As a matter of fact, there's a whole story about the connection between Zeus and Jehovah, because today Zeus gives us our word for God, Dios in Latin. And so Dios is Latin as God is taken from the name of Zeus. And they even have a canal called the Suez Canal, which is Zeus spelled backwards. So Zeus was very important back in those ancient days too, as a volcano god. You can see how the ancient people would be frightened, thinking that God was in this holy mountain and the mountain's on fire. We keep in mind that in the Hebrew language, it says thunder is called kolath, or voices, for it's considered the voice of God. The Bible in the Old Testament uses a term for the voice of God, but it is actually the word for thunder. After it, a voice roared. He thundered with his voice of his excellency. Again, just showing that we were talking about a volcano god going all the way back into ancient Egypt. And Yahweh was also called Volcanus. He was a Vulcan god, the god of the Vulcans. Even today in Hawaii, a volcano goddess. The whole idea of connecting a god with a volcano has to do with the sexual reproduction of the human race. That's the fire of reproduction. And so it's the fire that gives life to the earth. That's where it actually came from. Today, the Jewish religion is not as dominated by the moon as it was maybe thousands of years ago. So ideas change from time to time. Here's another important part of the Moses story, is that Moses, we are told, when the Israelites were trying to get out of the area they were in, and God was with them, they didn't have the foods, and they were starving. And so they came to Moses and said, you told us to leave, and we're following you, but now we don't have any food to eat. Moses talks to God, and it is said that God gave to the Hebrew people a manna to eat, and it was spelled M-A-N-N-A, manna. And so it was the manna from heaven. God said, all right, I will give you food for the moment. You're not going to starve. God told Moses, tell the people to go out in the morning, early morning, and on the ground there will be little round white disc-shaped things, and to eat it, because this will be good for you. And so that will save you from starving. Manna is actually in Hebrew means, what is it? Because the people didn't know what it was. It was on the ground and it was good to eat, but they don't know what it.
Jordan Maxwell has been on the cutting edge of new thought for over half a century. This is Secret Life of Symbols.
We think that we are getting better each day, and we have come from a more primitive society, but we are getting better every day and becoming more superior in knowledge and technology, when actually, in point of fact, we are digressing. We are moving away from what we were thousands and thousands of years ago. And I am of the opinion that our history has been vastly changed, and so that we don't really know the history of mankind on this earth. We are finding that there are
For those who are aware of the phenomena of abduction and alien contact, our first thought is that it's random. Why are certain people affected and others aren't? Some of you have heard the statistics regarding the numbers of patients that die as a direct result of patient care. You may have also read of the repeated efforts by lobbyists to restrict our access to natural supplements. Investigative journalist John Rappaport has spent decades keeping us informed as to the threats to our health freedom. He joins me today, and some of this conversation may be challenging. The images are certainly irreverent, but our hope is that the information will stick. And I want to thank you so much for joining on this one, because there is so much confusion around so many issues regarding our health, and you see legislators standing up in front of Congress telling why we have to have FDA approval over our supplements, when in reality, it's the stuff that has already passed their approval that is killing so many people. And I want to launch right in. Let's look at the scope of the problem, statistics, numbers.
Okay, good to be here. The year is 2000, July 26th. In the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, an insider named Dr. Barbara Starfield, who is working at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, another we salute thee from the insiders of the, everybody's credentials are impeccable all the way up and down the line, the journal, the school, the doctor, and she publishes a review on July 26, 2000, called "Is U.S. Health Really the Best in the World?" And in this paper, this revered, not just respected, but revered public health expert, Dr. Barbara Starfield, says that every year in the United States, the medical system is killing too.
POD, salute to you, my brother. Salute to you. Have a good day. I appreciate you for coming through. Your guys check DOD out, you know. Real man out here. You understand? Real conversation. If what makes him problematic is his Negroid DNA, then there's no hope for the Black race at all. Because we Black women cannot continue to exist without Black men. Like, yeah, we can. While yes, a full race, Black people cannot continue without any Black men, we don't need a large excess of them, though. We could significantly decrease their population and still continue to effectively reproduce Black girls. So, yeah, that it could work. It could work. It's just a matter of, do we want to take it there?